I fell into filmmaking by accident. It was around 2010, and I had never aspired to be a filmmaker. I have always been an avid film lover, but never aspired to be a filmmaker. I was a professional musician and an artist, and so that was my areas of focus. However, around 2010, I got really sick and tired of Hollywood horror and their relentless remakes and sequels, and I just wanted to make a film that I wanted to watch. And I borrowed a camcorder from my grandmother, and rounded up some friends. I wrote a 3-page script, and we shot a 20-minute short entitled Samhain Night Feast. And nobody was ever, my intent was never to show that film to anyone. It was purely made for myself and my friends that were involved in the film. However, a week or two after the film was made, I received an email from my cousin that Samhain Night Feast was going to be shown at the Bastards of Horror Film Festival in Pittsburgh. It was a festival which was run by Tim Gross and Charlie Fleming. So I was in a bit of disbelief that somebody had seen the film, and not only had they seen it, but wanted to feature it, in a film festival. So I reached out to Tim and asked him if it was true, to which he confirmed that they did want to show Samhain Night Feast. And I asked if I could have a couple free tickets just to show up and watch my film on the screen. They were more than happy to oblige. And I never really had any aspirations as far as it winning. I was just happy to be in a festival and have it shown. I knew I'd be up against seasoned filmmakers that had a lot of experience, so I had no high hopes. However, much to my surprise, at the end of the night, Samhain Night Feast, which was the last film to show, once it finished, Tim Gross came out, said hands down Samhain Night Feast was the winner, and asked me to come up and do a Q&A. So from there I thought, wow, if we can win a film festival making a 20-minute short without any knowledge, or, I'm sure that we could have put a lot more into that film, but it was more an excuse to just drink with my friends and have a good time and make something that I wanted to see. It was at that particular point in time that I thought, hey, let's do this for real and start an actual production company and go legit. So that's how I got in the world of filmmaking. It's really hard to believe, now that I think about it, that I've been involved with the world of independent horror films for 10 years now. Started in 2010, and to be honest with you, when I first started out, I thought we'd be lucky to make it 5 years. Even 5 years is a long time for an independent film production company. You figure a lot of people get discouraged after their first film because of lack of funds, problems procuring locations or permits, problems with the cast. So it can be very disheartening at times, but now I find myself 10 years later still in the world of filmmaking, and I just recently released what I would call my first official release. I don't count any of the shorts or, even my 2010 documentary or 2014 documentary, Blood on the Road. I don't really count that either because I wasn't involved in the actual filmmaking process. It was the other filmmakers that I was interviewing. They filmed their segments on their end. But with Tabulous, that's my first feature-length film, my first film that got major distribution with SGL Entertainment. So you can go into any of the major movie retailers and purchase a copy or find it on Amazon. And it was released on Blu-ray and DVD, double disc features for both. But that was the first film, not to digress, that I did the cinematography, the writing, the directing, the editing. I put together the soundtrack for the film, so it was a labor of love. It was my baby, and it was also my first departure from straight full-fledged horror. Although it has its horror elements, it is a neo-noir film, which goes back to my early love of German expressionist films, which really inspired me as a filmmaker. So it's not a full-fledged horror movie. There's not a lot of blood and guts and gore and no nudity. So, but it has its psychological horror element. So I'm very proud of that. But yeah, 10 years later and still going strong. I've had moments where I've taken a break from filmmaking just because you hit hardships like you do, whether it's lack of budget and you don't have the funds to make a film properly. That's probably one of the biggest pitfalls. And so, I've stopped sporadically over the years, but, I'm still here and still working on future releases and plans for future releases. I've been involved in the world of filmmaking long before I was a filmmaker. Prior to my first short film in 2010, I worked with a good friend of mine by the name of Barry Stevens on his film. Well, it was a scripted television series entitled City of the Dead. And you have to keep in mind this is pre-Walking Dead. So Walking Dead, to the best of our knowledge, wasn't even in pre-production at that time. And oddly enough, Barry had been in correspondence with Greg Nicotero. We had met him at one of the conventions, and Barry kind of pitched to him this idea of a television series that would follow a group of survivors post-zombie apocalypse, and season 1 would take place in the spring, and season 2 would take place in the summer, and season 3 in the fall, and season 4 obviously in the winter time. And then all of a sudden The Walking Dead came along and scooped up Greg Nicotero. I don't know for certain whether that is why he stopped his involvement. He never really had involvement to begin with, but he was in talks with Barry, and then The Walking Dead came along, so perhaps they stole him away from that production. But ultimately, The City of the Dead ran out of finances, and the project came to a halt. So that all happened a year or two prior to my first short film. And then after Samhain Night Feast was shot and filmed, I tried to do my first feature-length film entitled Caustic Zombies, and we finished the entire film as far as production, but I would say probably 3/4 of the way we just ran into some internal problems with the cast and crew members, and the film never got completed and edited the way that I intended it to be. It was a very rough cut. We did have a successful premiere at the Hollywood Theater in Dormont, Pennsylvania, but that was just a rough cut, and then just due to some of the problems, and I wasn't able to get my hands on the original footage we shot on film, and I wasn't able to get my hands on the original film for 4 or 5 years, and by that point I had grown so much as a filmmaker that there wasn't really it didn't really make much sense to go back and unearth that. Plus, I had just gotten some of my friends that didn't have any prior acting experience. So the acting's not the best. And then from my standpoint, my writing wasn't the best, and my directorial skills were not the best. So I doubt that film will ever see the light of day. And then after Caustic Zombies in 2012, I started work on a very dark animated film entitled Moe and Ankara. I had actually hired Doug Bradley, who was best known for Pinhead and Hellraiser, to do the narration on the film. And we had launched a very successful crowdfunding campaign. And that was enough to get pre-production started as far as building sets, which we were building on a 12-inch scale. And we had hired a doll maker to design and create the characters. And in the later stages of pre-production, we ran out of funding. And we needed the sets that we had built needed to be moved to a warehouse, which we didn't have the money to rent a warehouse or the trucks to transport them, and we didn't have the money to make the rest of the set pieces that we needed. So unfortunately, that film came to a grinding halt, and it was at that point where I didn't know if I wanted to continue in the world of independent filmmaking, just because it had started out so great, and then I had just ran into so many pitfalls after that. It was just one problem after the other. So I took a break from filmmaking, and in the latter part of 2013, I had the opportunity to work on an A&E television series where I was an actor in 2 episodes. I was an extra, and I got to work with Chloe Svegny and James Darcy, so that was a lot of fun. And that taught me a lot. That showed me that even a Hollywood set can be ran rather haphazardly, and there was a lot of issues on that set, just as far as people not knowing their roles, and I realized that some of my sets were handled a lot more efficiently, so that kind of gave me some promise. And then, not to digress too far, but after Caustic Zombies had wrapped, I got an acting role. I was the lead in a Brian Coddington film entitled Tablet of Tales, where I got to play a character by the name of Fritz Alistair Minar, who was the devil in human form. So that was a lot of fun. So I got to take a break and decompress from writing and directing to do a little bit of acting. And, back in my early junior high school days, and even elementary school days, I was involved in productions such as The Fiddler on the Roof, and was always in choir and the arts. So it was nice to revisit acting. both with Tablet of Tales and then to be on an A&E television series for 2 episodes. And then in 2014, I began work on a documentary entitled Blood on the Reel, which focused on the trials and tribulations that the independent horror filmmakers face. And that was something that I knew very well. You know, not only was it budget, but it was procuring locations. And during Cossack Zombies, I almost got shot by a military police. We rolled up on a power plant property without permission. And you have to understand, this is post 9/11, so it was frowned upon to just roll up on a power plant. And, you know, they didn't know our intent, but we just got out of the car with our cameras and started filming. And Cossack Zombies revolves around the near nuclear mishap of 3 Mile Island. And we went to Homer City, Pennsylvania, because they had reactors that looked very similar to those reactors at 3 Mile Island. The only difference is Homer City power plant was a half-hour away, whereas 3 Mile Island would have been a six and a half hour drive. But nonetheless, we didn't have permission, and we were in the midst of filming, and we heard a vehicle, and the next thing you know, this military jeep with an officer, a gun drawn right on us. He made us stop filming, threatened to confiscate the footage, so we had that issue. So there are so many issues and pitfalls that you can face as an independent filmmaker. So we talked a little bit about that in my documentary, Blood on the Reel. And that documentary was only meant to be a small documentary consisting of myself and maybe a handful of my filmmaker friends. But once word broke on the internet, the next thing you know, I had 90 filmmakers from all around the world who reached out and wanted to be a part of the documentary and share their stories. And from there, I think I weeded it down to about 20 filmmakers that made the final cut. However, if you watch any past interviews with me, I'm not very proud of the documentary. There were a lot of things that I could have done better, not only in the editing process, but also the way that I had to go about it. Obviously, I didn't have the funds to travel around the world and interview every filmmaker in person, so I had to do it remotely, sometimes by Skype or just emailing filmmakers questions and then having them set up their cameras and lights on their end and then send, Dropbox their footage back to me. And along with that, I had every file format under the sun for both video and audio. Some people had great audio, some people had very shoddy audio, some people had great lighting, some people had very poor lighting, some people had beautiful backdrops, some people didn't even take the time to set up a backdrop. And so it was all over the place as far as file formats and the audio formats, and just it ended up becoming a nightmare. And so I'm not very pleased with that documentary, I guess, for what I had to work with. And what I was trying to do is I was just trying to introduce other filmmakers from around the world to an audience that may have not known about them otherwise. So, and some of those filmmakers that were featured in Blood on the Reel got signed and got major distribution deals because of that documentary. And I got signed. That was my first major distribution deal doing that documentary. I got signed to SGL Entertainment. So, some good came out of that, but I don't consider it my first feature-length film. What I do consider my first feature-length film is after Blood on the Reel had wrapped, I immediately went into to do a film that I had always longed to do, and that was to create a 1920s-inspired neo-noir, German expressionist silent film entitled Noctambulist. And with that film, everything just fell into place. But it was the first film that I not only wrote and directed, but I got to do the lighting and the cinematography. I did the editing with that film, and so I was very hands-on. I composed and put together the soundtrack for the film. So what I didn't write, I found royalty-free stock music to put into the film, and so I was very hands-on with Noctambulist, and as far as I'm concerned, I think the film turned out beautiful. It exceeded my expectations. After Noctambulist wrapped, I was so afraid to even look at the footage that I think I sat on it for 2 or 3 months, and I just thought, wow, this is going to be extremely terrible or it'll be beautiful. And much to my surprise, once I got the courage to sift through the footage, it was a thing of beauty, and I couldn't be more proud. For what we had to work with, we had a very minimal budget, and I'm talking under $1,000 to make that film, and it had worldwide distribution with us, SGO Entertainment also. So you can pick it up at Best Buy and Walmart and Target. You can also find the double disc features of Blu-ray and DVD on Amazon, and you can stream it. So very proud of that film. And then now, Noctambulous has already been released for about a year and a half or 2 years, and I've been out of the filmmaker limelight as far as what I'm putting out, but I've been behind the scenes scripting and working on my next film, which will be entitled The Art of Defiance, which will be my first full departure away from the world of horror films. And it will actually be a film that focuses on the life of a painter. And also, it'll be my first film since I got to act on A&E, where I get back into the acting world. So I'm actually playing the lead character in the film Art of Defiance. So I'm very excited to get things rolling with that film. I guess the advice that I could give to aspiring filmmakers would be to make sure that your heart is in it, because you're going to have to sacrifice a lot. I've seen people, including myself, that have lost friends and even, personal relationships over filmmaking. And that's because if you're serious about it, you have to dedicate all of the time that you can to perfect your craft, to get it the best that you possibly can. So that means that you may have went out to the bars every Friday and Saturday and drank with your friends, but now you're home working on a script or filming. And if you don't have a significant other that is closely involved with you, you're not spending a lot of time with him or her. So that can take a toll on your relationship. And also, for me, all these years, I look at all of the things that I have sold over the years just to raise money to make my films. I've sold cars, I've lost homes. Sometimes, I didn't know if my mortgage payment was going to go through because I had just spent a couple $100s on props to make a movie. So you really, if you're looking to get into it long haul, you have to weigh the pros and cons. Pros and cons, as far as the cons, you're not going to get to see your friends as much as you used to. As far as doing frivolous things like hanging out at the bars and, unless they're directly involved with your movies and taking it seriously. And your professional relationships can suffer with your significant others. And most of us don't have a lot of money to begin with. So you have even less money when you're working in film. So those are things to consider. But as long as you have the heart and you have the drive and you have the ambition, you can do it. And just surround yourself with supportive people. There's a lot of people out there that like to troll these days, and a lot of people that like to hate because maybe they're jealous that you're actually trying to make your dreams come true. So surround yourself with positive people. I will never bash another filmmaker. Even if I don't like their movie, I will never bash them. It's just not my personality. And, I can see a movie and say, yeah, it wasn't my cup of tea, or I didn't really enjoy it, but I commend that filmmaker for seeing it through, because it takes a lot to see your film come from fruition, or from concept to fruition. So you could say, yeah, I'm going to make a movie, but how many people actually make it? So to see somebody that writes a script and, procures a cast and crew, and they're able to complete that film, my hat's off to them. I give them a lot of credit, and I would never judge anybody for that, even if I'm not a fan of their work. It takes a lot to get a film made, and you need to surround yourself by positive, supportive people. And of course, there's going to be, those bad critic reviews that, are really going to sink you to your lowest depths at times. And we've all had that, no matter how good or bad our film has had. So just stick with positive people and try not to listen to all the naysayers. And as long as you believe in your heart that what you're doing is worth it, that's all that matters. So here's the part where I advertise my social media. And I'm not really good at remembering my handles. I know that if you go to Facebook and type in Johnny Daggers, you can find my official Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, which I seldom use Twitter, but if you want to follow me on Twitter, I know that my handle is Johnny Daggers 2. If you search Johnny Daggers on Instagram, you will find me there. And you can also find me on my official website, which is officialjohnnydaggers.com. And again, I need to get that updated. It's tough when you're constantly working on your art. You don't have a lot of time to update your website or to even spend a lot of time on social media. So it's very difficult. But I wanted to let everybody know that if you're an avid reader, not only am I a filmmaker, but I am also a published author. I released my first publication, which is a novella entitled Neverlasting, and that was published by Burning Bulb Publishing. And it was actually held by a UK publication. TE Magazine held it as the modern day Edgar Allan Poe. It's very dark and gothic, and one of my earliest inspirations was Edgar Allan Poe, so the entire novella is told in rhyme, and it was also loosely inspired by Tim Burton's Vincent, his short, and it appeals to younger readers as well as older, mature readers. There's nothing in there that's too extremely graphic. And then, of course, as I had mentioned, what I would like to consider my debut feature-length film, Noctambulist, which was released through SGL Entertainment, and that's available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Best Buy, Target, most of the major movie retailers. And if I didn't say it, Neverlasting is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and also in audiobook format, which is read by yours truly, and you can find that on Audible. And then, as mentioned, I'm working on my next film, which is my full departure from horror, entitled The Art of Defiance. So any of my social media pages will keep you up to date on that. But I thank you for watching, and I hope that some of my advice to future filmmakers was helpful. And if you catch me at a convention, which I don't attend those too often, I'm a bit of a hermit and like to stay very behind the scenes. But if you see me out at a convention or at a film festival, stop by, say hello, or send me an email, and I will gladly answer that and correspond with you. So thank you very much. This is Johnny Daggers signing out.